Cool. Awesome. So I'll just give you a little bit of a background on myself. My name is Amy Chan. I am the founder and chief heart hacker of a company called Breakup Bootcamp. We take a scientific and spiritual approach to healing the heart. So I hope before the pandemic, I hosted retreats where people would come out in nature. It's a luxury experience. And I would bring in 13 experts from psychologists, behavioral scientists to sex educators, anxiety coaches to help people after breakup or divorce heal from the process, rewire old patterns and limiting beliefs so that they can create healthy love. I'm also the author of the book Breakup Bootcamp, The Science of Rewiring Your Heart, that was just published by Harper Collins. And I spend my entire life hacking love. I understand and study the psychology of relationships, of our patterns, of dating, of attraction. I've been doing this for about 13 years now, and it's what I love. So I'm super excited to have this session with you because it might be a little bit different from what you've experienced in some of the other sessions. We're going to talk about relationship patterns. And here's the thing. You might be thinking, well, you know what? I've been married for, 20 years. I don't need to know anything. But here's the thing. Our relationship patterns, they ripple effect into all of our relationships. I'll talk more about romantic today, but really you can apply the same things, whether it's a business relationship or with friends or your network. And so all I ask, keep an open mind. What we're going to go through today, and you can cue the slides now, Nikki. We're going to go over a few different things. So first, we're going to talk about why do we repeat the same romantic patterns? And you can go to the next one. And then we're actually going to dive into emotions. And so it's a funny thing how they don't really teach you about how to manage your emotions in school. I mean, I learned how to dissect frogs. I didn't learn how to deal with anxiety or rage or any of those things. And we're going to talk about why do we feel certain emotions over and over again. And that's going to be very personal for each one of us. And I'm going to explain the reason why and how we can actually learn the tools to start shifting that so that we're not just prisoners of our emotions. I'm then going to end off talking about our communications and how we can actually become really, really good at negotiating our needs and our boundaries. And this is going to be a template for you, and you'll have a worksheet. I've already put it into the chat, and we'll go through it together so that in the future, whether you're having a negotiation with your wife on who should do the dishes, or you're negotiating with your co-founder, you will be able to have a template so that you can actually create more harmony and peace in your conversations and in high stakes conversations. So without further ado, I'll go over the attractions of deprivation. Nikki, can cue the next slide. So for those of you, whether you're single or you're coupled or somewhere in between, if you've ever experienced being drawn to someone, and in your brain, you're like, oh, I know that this person isn't good for me, or I know that this relationship dynamic isn't healthy, but something in your body's like, just go for it anyway, right? There's a misalignment. Has anyone ever experienced this in your life? If you have, just raise your hand. Okay, so a few of us. Awesome. And again, throughout, if anything resonates while I'm talking today, raise your hand, raise the roof, whatever it is, snap your fingers. If it doesn't, you can say no, but feel free to engage so I know what's hitting and what's not. So here's the thing. Attractions of deprivation is a theory that's talked a lot about in psychology. And this is when we are drawn to people who can wound us in a very similar way to how we're wounded as children. Our psyche tries to recreate the scenario of the crime in an attempt to change its ending. So I'll give you an example. I grew up in a very chaotic household. I'm the child of immigrant parents. My mom and dad had a business. They were never around. My father was very unavailable, both emotionally and physically. And I learned at a young age that the only time I got some attention was when I got good grades, and he would give me money. And so growing up, I never thought anything about this, but I was constantly drawn to people who were unavailable. Often the people that I, was obsessive over didn't live in the same city, let alone same country. I would always be pining for their time. I would edit myself to try to be perfect in hopes that maybe, I would finally earn their commitment. I would finally earn their love. And, relationship after relationship, I was like, I don't understand. I thought I must be broken. There must be something wrong with me. Or, these people suck. They're just emotionally unavailable. What a narcissist. I would pathologize people. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's something else going on here. And it wasn't until my early 30s I started to recognize that I was playing out this loop from childhood, because we human beings, we like closed loops. If there's an open loop, it causes mental tension. We want to close that loop. And so what I was doing was I was trying to meet these people, date these people romantically in an attempt to finally get that love I never got as a child, to finally earn that affection and that attention, to try finally prove that I am worthy of love by doing these things. And so I think it's important for us to understand that, because sometimes I think, especially in our romantic relationships, we could feel like we're going crazy. We could feel like we're broken. But when we could start to understand the psychology of why we feel and behave the way we do, we have a starting point to start creating some change. We'll go into the next slide now, Nikki, and I want to talk about our homeostasis. So we all have a homeostasis. This is what keeps our bodies functioning. It's our body's equilibrium. And we are wired to stay in balance with what's familiar. And so you might have heard before, neurons that fire together, wire together. And something to consider is when a circuit keeps wiring, it can become the default setting. And then that makes that reaction, whatever reaction you had, to likely to happen again in the future. So let's think about this. If you grew up in a household and you felt unsafe, if you felt abandoned, those associated chemicals, they stick around for years, if not decades, and you get really good at reacting with anxiety and fear, right? Eventually what happens is your cells become desensitized, and then you need more of that stimulus. So you need more drama, you need more anger, you need more chaos to give you that kind of hit. And what's interesting, if you think about cutters, people who do cutting, you might think, well, why the hell would someone take a blade to their wrist and start cutting themselves? It makes absolutely no sense. But when a cutter cuts themselves, they actually get endorphins that feel like they just got a high dose of morphine. And the same thing happens. So when, say, someone who's chronically depressed, when they think sad, painful thoughts, when they replay that memory over and over again, guess what happens? That memory, that replaying itself will trigger endorphins in the brain. We get addicted to these emotions. And what happens is we don't remember the scene of the crime when we were young. We don't recognize, like, oh, it's because, my parents were fighting all the time. I was in the middle of chaos. We don't remember that. We develop this kind of baseline, and that becomes our norm. I'm going to repeat this throughout this whole session. Human beings are drawn to what is familiar, and we will keep recreating scenarios, drawing people in, whether it's romantic partners, whether it's business partners, whether it's friends, whether we're in a dynamic with someone and then we cause a certain fight or we self-sabotage, because we are drawn to what's familiar. If familiarity with drama and chaos, we will recreate that over and over again. Next slide. So say you're like, you know what, I've been there, done that. I had a toxic relationship. I, had a terrible co-founder. I cut ties with them. But you're still like, why do I still feel, resentful and angry? Well, what happens is when we, get rid of the actual, say, person or even the situation, then we recall memories to do the job. Or we'll just get into another dynamic, a different person, same experience. We might even recreate that same scenario with this next person. And so, for example, I know for myself, I used to pride myself as an overgiving. I would overgive in work. I was always the one raising my hand to take on more projects. Then I would resent my coworkers for not doing as much as I was. In my romantic relationships, I was always giving, cooking the dinners, packing the lunches, making sure everything was great in the household. Would do the same thing with friends, and I would always end up feeling resentful. And for most of my life, I just thought people are takers. They're takers, I'm a giver, and it's pretty unfair. Why aren't people more like me? But it wasn't until I realized that my baseline was resentment. I was addicted to resentment, and I kept creating scenarios. I kept saying yes when I meant no. I kept giving even though I was on empty, because resentment felt familiar to me. We'll go into the next slide. This is my take on the emotional wheel. So I want us to reflect on what might be some emotions that you are experiencing over and over again. And in the next slide, Nikki, you can kill. There's a worksheet. I've also put this into the chat. And we're not going to do the whole thing right now, but I would love for us to just take a moment and conduct an emotional inventory. And you can look at this as in your current relationship you have right now. You can reflect on a relationship you had in the past, but consider what were some of the unhelpful emotions. We'll work on that today. What's an unhelpful emotion that has come up for you that might be a bit repetitive?
So I have two. I have not belonging and an imbalance of giving and taking.
Got it. So not belonging is, let's get to the root of that. So what's the emotion behind not belonging? Consider, Nikki, you as a 5-year-old child. And when did you start feeling that you didn't belong? And what was that feeling you felt? So not belonging, what does that trigger? Is it sadness?
So the thing it triggers that I walk away. No, the response is I walk away.
Right.
Right. So I have a feeling of not belonging. Response is I walk away.
Okay. So let's dig a bit deeper. What is the actual feeling?
Well, the feeling is probably some sort of a loneliness.
Loneliness. And what's the feeling behind loneliness?
Not deserving.
And how does one feel when they don't feel like they deserve?
I don't know, maybe facing expectations that I can't deliver up to.
So if you actually just go back to the doodle slide with the emotions, let's just go there for fun. If you just kind of go back here, so there's primary emotions that we feel. And that's scared, sad, mad, joyful, peaceful. What out of those would you say best describes that experience of when you don't feel belonging?
Guilty, ashamed, lonely, depressed.
Okay. Yeah. And the very first one, right? So we have primary emotions, which is like the very immediate emotion. We don't even think about it. And then we have secondary emotions, which are the emotions we have about the emotion. So it seems like what you're saying is the root emotion is sad or feeling scared, maybe a combination. And then you feel emotions about that. You might feel guilty or ashamed about feeling sad and scared. Does that resonate?
Totes.
Yeah. And then your reaction to that, the defense mechanism you learn was, when I feel sad, when I feel scared, I run away. I avoid it. It's too much for me. I'm out of here. Right. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that, I think when we share, it is a vulnerable thing to do. And what it does is it gives other people permission to feel their emotional experience. And here's the thing, when I work with people, everyone's got trauma, whether it's big trauma or little trauma, whether you're aware of it or you're not. And we all think we're isolated and alone in that. We all think that, oh, no, it's only me that feels that. I'm fucking scared of rejection. I've been so scared of not belonging. I've rejected other people before that they could reject me, right? And on the outside, I was like, oh, no, I'm totally confident. Like, I don't need you. I'll just overgive so I can have control, and I'll never need you. You'll need me. But if you peel back the layers, right? The coping mechanisms, the defenses, it's me feeling sad, me feeling scared. Where did I get that from? I learned that as a young kid. And then I learned how to protect myself the best I could when I was a child, which was to hide, which was to avoid, which was to reject. And what happens is we go through life and we don't look at these coping mechanisms and ask ourselves, does it serve us now? So let's continue on with, you can go, and then we'll go to the next one. I want us to think about how might we be contributing to this emotion, whatever emotion has kind of been coming up for you, frustration, boredom, sadness, resentment, anger. Work with one of those, whatever it was that came up for you. I saw a bunch of different ones in the chat. And I want you to think about how might you be contributing? Are you choosing people that kind of get in that same dynamic that you had when you had with, say, your mother who was controlling? Do you create scenarios where this thing keeps happening over and over again? Do you say yes to things even though you're like, oh, I don't want to do it, but I'm scared they won't like me anymore, so I'm just going to do it anyway? Do you try to prove that you're worthy, and then you give and you do these things and you treat and you act super generous, but that's really a coping mechanism, and that leaves you feeling resentful and angry? So I want you to consider that. And I also want to talk about thinking traps, because this is another thing that we do, and we're all kind of guilty of it, that adds to our emotions and creates these emotional experiences. So thinking traps are our brain's way of making meaning. We are meaning-making machines. And these are interpretations and assumptions that simply aren't true, but they cause more anxiety and more stress. So we'll go into the next slide where I'll discuss a few of them. So catastrophizing is a big one. This is when, maybe you went through a breakup and you're like, I'm never gonna love again. Like, I'm this age, like, how am I, forget it. Like, it's over for me. Or there's a pandemic, like, my business, it's fucked. Like, I'm never gonna survive this, ever. All or nothing thinking is another one. This is my go-to thinking trap. This is when you say things like, oh, this always happens to me. They never show up for me. You use these words that kind of have this kind of black and white extreme. Change fallacy is when we expect other people to change, and only if they do this, then I'll finally fill in the blank, happy, peaceful, whatever it is. Blaming is when we're like, no, it's all their fault. It's my co-founder's fault that, this business sucks. It's, my ex who's a total narcissist. It's all their fault. And then that actually is unhelpful, because you don't have any perspective into your accountability. And when you don't have perspective into your accountability, you have no choice. You're like, oh, no, I have no choice in this. It just fucking happened to me. It sucks. Should statements is a huge thing that happens when something disappointing happens, whether it's a breakup, whether someone didn't live up to their expectations. This is when we impose expectations on other people or even ourselves, and we get caught in a rumination cycle that's, rooted in criticism and judgment of, they should have done this. I should have known better. Filtering is when we have an idea of something and then we just only see that. So if you think that dating in Sweden sucks, you're like, oh, all the girls in Sweden, they don't want to commit. Then you will find evidence that will make that belief true. I'll kind of just go, personalizing is the next one I just want to talk about. This is when we take a situation and we make it about ourselves. Maybe you send an email and you don't hear back. What's the first thing that goes into your mind? They must not like me. Ugh, how disappointing. oh, I shouldn't have done that. Now I feel so stupid. Like now I look desperate and needy, right? You personalize it about yourself when maybe they're just busy. I've accidentally forgotten to email people back so many times. And then they remind me, I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Meanwhile, I'll find out in their head for 3 weeks, they're like, had this whole story that, I didn't like them, that I didn't value the friendship anymore. All these things. I'm like, what? I never even thought about it. I didn't even remember. So how might you be contributing to this emotion? And we'll go into the next slide. We're not going to, go through this together, but I want to set you up so that in your own time, you're able to. But a few things I'd love for you to reflect on. What is the cost if you continue this? If you continue contributing to this emotion? And I love having accountability. And so what is one thing you need to stop doing? And if you're open to sharing, share it either in the chat. What's one thing you need to stop doing? I know for me, one thing I need to stop doing is just expecting people know what I want. I, for some reason, think that everyone is like me. And that whether it's a friend, whether it's someone I've just hired, whether it's my partner, I just think you should know. And then when I get the result and I'm disappointed, I'm disappointed. So what is one thing that you need to stop doing? One thing you're going to stop doing is to expect people to do what you would do. One thing you're going to stop doing is to stop helping people and feeling let down because they don't reciprocate. Yeah, so maybe it's not giving from a place of, okay, am I going to get something back? Because is that really pure giving? And then what's something you're going to start doing? So I'll start. One thing I'm going to start doing is being extremely clear in what my standards are. Instead of just letting, someone go off, whether it's, the latest thing was I was getting a website built and I was like, yeah, okay, they should know, like they were recommended, whatever. And then I get this thing a week after I didn't check in on their work and I'm so disappointed. But then I looked at my communication and I actually didn't really let them know what I wanted. And I do this across my life. So if you're open to it, share what is one thing you're going to start doing. And the reason why I love share is it puts energy behind the intention, because we could have all these amazing intentions and we don't action them. And then what? We just keep doing the same pattern. Okay, so Nikki, you're going to start aligning your practical behavior with your theoretical behavior. Okay, cool. Awesome. So I'm gonna continue, but there's some prompts here for you at your own time. Is the truth I've been hiding is, what am I not saying that needs to be said? And what is one thing I can do now to create the life and relationships I want? And Neil, thank you. Being more open about how I feel. I mean, that's a step too. Even you just sharing that is you taking a step in the direction of being more open. Right? Because I know it can feel a little bit intimidating to share in a group of strangers that you don't know that much. So learning how to manage that vulnerability and maybe taking one step, kind of assessing how it is, instead of taking 5 steps and be like, are you taking any steps? Right? Just having that balance. And that's a practice. Asking more questions, practicing that muscle of curiosity. And so now that we know there's some things we're going to stop doing, there's some things that we're going to start doing, well, how the hell do we even communicate it? And that's what this last part of the session is going to be. We are going to learn how to communicate with mastery. And so when we're about to have a high stakes conversation, and a high stakes conversation is anything where there's something that say you really want. It's an important topic. That might be, you want more passion in your relationship, or it might be, okay, I'm going to talk to my boss about, work-life balance during COVID. Whatever that is, there's something at stake. It's a high stakes conversation. And something to consider is when we have a high stakes conversation, the hardest work is done up front. And that is how we set the tone for that conversation. Now, the thing is, when we have these high stakes conversations, especially when it's charged, right? Especially when there's something that you want and you're like, oh, I just really want this thing. We kind of default into this kind of childlike behavior of like, I want this thing, I'm going to go get it, right? You might react like how you reacted as a child. I'm not getting this thing, so I'm just going to have a tantrum. I'm going to make demands. I'm going to give an ultimatum. Yeah, I'm going to force this person to give me what I want. How does that conversation go for you?
Bad.
Pretty fucking bad, right? Right. Marcus, you want to just tell someone to fuck off and die. Does that conversation overall give you what you want? No.
No, because I downgrade it to just fuck off. It's still bad.
Right. We think it, we go back into our monkey mind, right? Or we might even do the tactics of what our parents did to us, right? When they want us to clean our room, clean your room. Why are you so messy? Why are you such a bad kid? You might go clean your room and you hate them, right? When people make demands from us, when they force us, when they use those tactics our parents used on us, when someone makes a demand, we are boxed into a corner. We have two real choices that aren't choices. We can either submit and then resent you after, or we can rebel and be like, fuck you, I'm not going to do it. You want me to clean your room? Fuck you. I'm just going to leave my shit all around, right? And so we don't upgrade the way that we communicate, the way that we try to negotiate. And we have to think about the bigger picture, which is, what is it that we want out of this conversation? But we get so sidetracked because our emotions hijack our entire conversation. And then we get into, fuck you, we get into boxing gloves. So boxing gloves or handshake. And this is what I hope you remember before you have any sort of a high stakes conversation. Boxing gloves is when you use you language. You do this. You totally frustrate me. You disappoint me all the time. Boxing gloves is the timing. I know I used to just love to spring on these deep conversations about how the relationship is going late at night when my partner is about to fall asleep. And he's just so tired. He doesn't want to talk about it, but that's when I want to talk about how's it going? What do you think we could do to add more? And he's just like not having it. And I learn, I'm like, bad timing. Just because I want to talk about it right then because I feel an emotion, it doesn't mean it's the optimal time to have that conversation. Get more strategic about when you have these conversations. Boxing gloves is when you send a message and be like, we need to talk. Have any of you ever received an email or text message of, we need to talk, and felt excited about that conversation?
Nope.
It automatically gets you into defensive mode of like, oh my God, like, are they going to break up with me? Are they going to end something? Is someone dying? Oh my God, something's wrong. It's the worst thing to say. Don't ever use that ever again. And so it's important that we think about boxing gloves or handshake. Handshake is when you use I language. And we're going to actually go over a template of how you can have these conversations using a handshake. Going in with curiosity and compassion. Compassion is one of the most important things because this sets the vibe, right? People energetically can feel you. When you meet someone and you're like, something's off about this person, even though everything on the outside seemed fine, you're like, something feels weird. Has anyone ever experienced that? You meet someone, you're like, something just feels off. I know I have. And the reason why you feel that, even though on a cognitive level, you don't process what's wrong, like they're dressing fine, they're saying the right things, because your subconscious is picking up cues. It's picking up the inflection of the voice. It's picking up the little raised eyebrow, those micro expressions that you actually can't cognitively process. But your subconscious picks it up, and then you can feel that feeling, and then you can tap into your intuition and be like, something feels off about that. And so when we go into a conversation and we are pissed as hell, and we're using, 3 words in our responses back, I'm fine. Yeah, nothing's wrong. People can energetically pick it up. And again, you've already started off with boxing gloves. When you start off with boxing gloves, someone's defense mechanisms goes up. You turn on their amygdala. Their prefrontal cortex, a part that is logical and is rational, starts to dim. You're dealing with someone with their monkey mind. They're being flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. And this is meant to prepare the body to either fight you, to run away, or to freeze. You are having an animal response. That is why boxing gloves, you've already lost the conversation. We can go into the next slide. I'm going to go over this quickly. So another question to ask yourself is, are you age regressing? So when we are emotionally overwhelmed, we can default into a childhood state. And this is how we often reacted when we were a child. So we can react as a wounded child. This is between age 1 to 6. We're completely dependent on our parents for our needs. We feel inferior. We have no boundaries. We're very needy. When something happens, we internalize it as something wrong with us. I am bad, right? Parents got in a fight. It's my fault. It's all me, me, me. Often you're overwhelmed. You people please. Life is very chaotic. And then the adapted adolescent is what is the response to protect the wounded child. So this is ages 6 to 18, where instead of inferior, they feel superior, like, fuck you. I'm better than you. Instead of having boundaries, there's walls. No way, you're not going to hurt me. I'm done with being disappointed. Here's a whole wall around my heart. You're not getting through. Needless. You've been so disappointed with having your needs met. You're like, I don't need anyone's needs. I'm just going to be so independent. And here, screw you, everyone. Right? Instead, and then you blame. It's like, it's your fault. You're the asshole. You might go into retaliating. You might control. You might be defensive. And then it's our job to be a functional adult. This is when we feel equal. No one's better or worse than us. We're able to set limits and healthy boundaries. We can communicate them. We accept imperfections in ourselves and with others. We're able to self-soothe. We're able to respond, and we are responsible and accountable for our reality. So the question you want to ask when you are about to have a high-stakes conversation, what age are you? Because if you are age regressing to your wounded child or adapted adolescent, that's boxing gloves. Also assess the person you're about to have the conversation with. What age are they? Are they a wounded child? Because if one person is a wounded child, and unless you are able to kind of get them out of that and make them feel safe, again, they have boxing gloves. It's unlikely going to result in a conversation that's going to get you both on the same page of what you both want. We'll go into the next slide. So this template is going to be your go-to template. Before you have these conversations, check those boxes, handshake or boxing gloves. And then we're going to learn the nonviolent communication method. And something to keep in mind, using this kind of format might feel very unnatural in the beginning, and that's okay because it's new. Again, we're drawn to what's familiar. So this is not familiar yet. That's okay. The more you do it, the more familiar it is, the more it'll be second nature. And what I do is I'll still write it out before it's a really big conversation, just so I can process what's in my brain, get really narrowed down into actually how I'm feeling and what I need and actually what I want. So often we're just troubleshooting the wrong things. We're troubleshooting the symptoms, right? We might say, I want more flowers. I want more whatever it is, when really the root need is connection. So the very first step is you observe the situation without judgment. This is just stating the facts of what has happened. The next step is you identify your feelings. So back to that feelings doodle, you want to get into what is the actual feeling, right? And using things like, oh, I feel betrayed. That's not a feeling, it's an accusation. So get to what is it, sad? Is it angry? Because they usually come down to a few key primary emotions. And again, if you're not that used to being able to identify your feelings, the practice of just labeling your feelings is probably going to feel a little uncomfortable and foreign. But this is a really handy trick, is just labeling how you feel and writing it down. Studies have shown that it takes the emotional charge down just a bit. It takes the sting away just a little bit. It removes a little bit of that stress. And so the next thing, again, you identify what you feel, and then you can go into the next slide. And then you assess the unmet need. Again, what is the actual need that you want? And I've listed some of the common ones because they generally fall into this, right? Is it really that, you just want another boys' weekend to go skiing uninterrupted? Or is it really that the base need is autonomy, right? Troubleshoot the right thing. What is the unmet need? And the next step is you make a clear request. But again, you don't make a demand, because again, when you make a demand, that person gets defensive. They've got boxing gloves on now. You use a disarming opener. And they've actually done studies that show that before you make a request, if you just put, would you be open-minded to? In these studies in neurolinguistic programming, they saw that there was a 50% increase of people saying yes. Again, use this for good, not for evil. But the rationale behind that is generally people want to see themselves as being open-minded. So if you phrase it with that opener, they're more likely to be like, yeah, I am open-minded. Okay, I'm going to be more open to whatever you're going to suggest. So you now have a template. And again, what I would recommend is you start small. Don't have, that huge conversation that might break your relationship, right? Start small. It might be like, okay, who's going to take out the garbage? Who's going to make that investor deck today? Whatever it is, start smaller. Build this muscle of learning how to navigate and work through this template, this tool you now have in your arsenal of how to communicate your needs and boundaries in a way that can create what you want to be collaborative versus combative. And then as you grow that muscle, then you can have a little bit higher stakes and then a little bit higher stakes. We'll go into the next slide. So I'm going to recap. I talked a lot today. A few key points we discussed. Human beings, we are drawn to what is familiar. Our partners are our mirrors. And so while we're trying to close that loop, they're also a mirror for us to actually heal these old wounds, to grow past and evolve them. But if we keep just avoiding people every time we get triggered, we just run into the same emotional experience over and over again with different people. We have a homeostasis. This is our baseline, and we can get addicted to emotions. So identifying what those addictions are, that emotional addiction. Are you getting that hit of anger? When you get into that fight because you're addicted to anger, do you feel that charge? You're getting that endorphin. It's like drugs. It's addictive. And then you need more of that anger to kind of rile you up the next time. You can now interrupt the cycle by identifying what are the emotions you're addicted to. How are you contributing? What do you need to start? What do you need to stop? So that you can start interrupting that pattern and shifting it. And then understanding the root of our emotions and how to communicate our needs, our boundaries. This is a practice. It's a muscle that you build. We'll go into the next slide. And I know I've said a lot. And I know it might be like, oh, this is so much, I have so much work to do. I'm broken. I don't know where to start. But remember, change happens little by little. It's these small incremental steps that we take every single day. It's those small choices that next time you have that conversation, instead of, being like, you fucking pissed me off, taking a moment to pause and being like, I wonder why she's so angry. I wonder what happened when she was 5 years old for her to react the way she's reacting right now. I'm going to put myself in her shoes for 1 second. Small choice, degree by degree. And you may not be able to change your destination in an instant, but you can choose to change your direction right now, degree by degree. Eventually, you end up somewhere completely new. And I would love to just leave with a few words. We've learned a lot today. Thank you so much for showing up and participating and being vulnerable and sharing, giving permission to other people to feel their feelings as well. And whatever situation you are in, whether you're single, whether you're a couple, whether you're divorced, remember this: our greatest lesson in this lifetime is to practice opening our hearts, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. If you've been hurt before, I know that the reaction might be to just hide, to put walls around your heart, to make, these extreme coping mechanisms of I'm never going to get hurt again. And maybe your coping mechanism has been to be super hard and to be like, you know what, fuck you. But where can you soften? Because that is a practice. Our greatest lesson in this lifetime is to practice opening our hearts, especially when it hurts. Thank you so much for joining, for your presence.